In this video, I'm going to be painting the most important miniature I've ever painted. Hello Internet, and as I just said, I'm going to be painting the most important miniature I have ever painted. Now, what can be such an important miniature, I hear you ask? Well, last year on August 8th, I got down on one knee and I asked my girlfriend to be my wife. Ever since that date, she's actually been my fiancée. But at the end of the week, she will be my wife. So in case you didn't figure it out, she said yes. That's why she will be my wife. Now, being the quirky individuals that we are, we don't really want anything to be too boring for a wedding. We are going fairly traditional, but everything's got a bit of us within it, including the cake. And on top of the cake, you have a bride and groom in their finery. There are two problems with that. One, you never get a fat groom. Look at me, I'm way too round. And two, they're just too boring and don't represent us in any way. So when talking to our baker or cake designer sounds better, I put forward the idea of potentially 3D printing my own cake toppers and painting them myself. And she was on board with this, and so was Nicola. She was very excited by the idea because it could be a lot more personal. Throughout our relationship, penguins have kind of been a bit of a theme. All of our friends and family know it. Obviously, we know it. And we thought we'd incorporate it into the wedding. We couldn't have penguins walking the rings down the aisle, unfortunately. But next best thing, I guess, was I found two adorable sculpts on my mini factory of a penguin holding a bouquet and another one with a top hat and a bow tie. So I excitedly printed these off at home using my Creality Harlot 1. If you're interested in getting into 3D printing, I would say it's a pretty good entry point. I'm very happy with it, and it didn't require too much learning. I did have a few issues with printing these specific models, something I hadn't really encountered before. I printed a fair bit of scenery and whatnot on this printer, but I'd never had this issue. The female penguin, on its right side, back, kind of as if you thought the penguin would happen butt cheeks, its right butt cheek kept being indented with scratchy lines. Obviously these are the layer lines. And I couldn't figure out what was doing it. This happened 3 times, and on the 4th time I decided to just give up. That's right, I actually had 4 failed prints. Fortunately, the only affected area was this patch on the back, so I decided to bite the bullet and roll some green stuff, fill that gap and try and smooth it out best I could. And before being primed and whatnot, it kind of looks a bit horrid, but I promise, once it's done, it looks pretty good. Fortunately, these 2 penguins came with their own base, which meant I didn't have to try and figure out one of an appropriate size to make sure they don't look too big or too small on the base. It had one that was just right. However, I knew I didn't want them to just be stood on a flat slab. No, I wanted them to look like they were potentially within an igloo. So I decided to print out a texture roller on my 3D printer again, which will create the effect of a cobblestone kind of base, which I think looks excellent for slabs of ice through an igloo floor. Once I had cleaned up the roller itself, all I needed to do was roll out some mini putt, roll out smooth to begin with, and I did it around 1/2 centimetre thick. Then using my textured roller, I went over in one direction with a fair bit of pressure to create the grooves and indents that would hint at it being a rocky, cobblestoney, icy base. I'm really quite happy with the result of this, and it's given me some ideas for some Cephron bases in the future. I want those to be jungly, but I kind of like the idea of there being some abandoned tombs and stuff, so you could break bits of this off to look like old bits of ruin, like in the soil. Now it's time to dive into painting. However, I had to move house. Now those of you that are regular viewers of the channel may have noticed I've been gone for a couple months now, and the reason for that is because the end of our tenancy was coming up and we didn't have a place to go. We'd had a couple move-ins lined up and both of them had fallen through, unfortunately. However, we eventually managed to secure a mortgage. Yes, I've actually bought a house, which is mental, and get a date set. However, it wasn't for another month after our move out date. As such, that meant putting everything we own, all of our possessions and all of our furniture and cutlery, crockery, everything, all the bedding and whatnot, everything into storage. And my office was the first thing to be packed up. The reason for that is because of how delicate all of these things are, I didn't want to risk them getting broken. So I took the time and effort to really carefully package them to ensure there was limited fatalities on them. This meant I was in the old house for around a month without any painting supplies, which has been horrible. It's the longest I've gone for a very long time without painting. Over 2 months without picking up a paintbrush. It's been torture. Obviously I know, small fry, like people dying and stuff, but it's been, you know. And whilst I could have potentially have taken a small selection of paints and a single miniature with me for the months that I was out of the house, we were in Airbnbs, we were moving from place to place. Because it's the height of summer, it's pretty booked up. We couldn't really get anywhere for the entire span of time. And that meant we just had a suitcase full of clothes, which for me isn't too much of an issue. I had like 4 t-shirts that I kept washing and just wore for the whole time. However, my fiance, primary school teacher, the kids are going to point it out that she's wearing the same clothes. So she has to take quite a bit of stuff with her. Now though, we are in our new place. And look, new place. I will give you a proper look at the office at some point. I just wanted to get a painting video out because it's been so long. Once I'm back from my honeymoon, which I'm going to be going on soon at the end of the week, I will do a more in-depth look at the actual office. So yeah, why is this relevant? The reason I didn't get to paint these straight away is they went into storage as well. So I've only just got to paint them this last week and get married at the end of the week. Now let's get back to the actual painting. I opted to stick the penguin straight to the base, and the reason for this is because I'm kind of just lazy. I could have painted them separately, but I just couldn't be bothered. I want to stick it all together and get going. I primed the whole thing with Citadel Black, got a nice coverage, and I didn't bother with a Zenithal highlight. I normally do, but I decided I wanted to go from a flat base coat for a change so that I could really pay attention to the different colours. So the first thing that I painted was the base, and there were a few reasons for this. One, I knew it would be the quickest to do whilst having potentially the most impact, therefore being the most rewarding. 2, I thought it would really help create an atmosphere and get me started on making a scene. And 3, I just like dry brushing. The first colour that I used on the base was a mid-tier grey, and for a change I didn't base coat it how I normally would. I decided to take a dry brush and leave a lot more paint on it than usual. Some people call this overbrushing, and then went over the whole base like that. That meant that the deepest recesses would actually remain black and start to hint at a texture. Once I was happy with this coverage, I went ahead and I applied a blue wash over the whole thing. My reason for picking blue is because I want it to look icy. 1, ice generally looks a little bit blue, like glaciers and stuff. 2, it's quite a cold colour. And 3, the shadow colour for white that appears most in nature is blue. A while ago in a video about painting white armour, which I'll throw in a card up here, I explained why blue so often shows up in the shadows for white in nature. So yeah, that influenced my decision as well. I decided to dry brush the whole base with Fenrisian Grey, and this is a favourite colour of mine because I'm not overly fond of using just straight up grey, but I quite like Fenrisian Grey because it has a tint of blue. After that, I dry brushed on a white, and I hadn't washed the brush in between these 2 steps, so it wasn't a pure white. It had been slightly mixed with this grey, which I think actually helps because it starts to build up a gradient a bit more gradually than just BAM! White. Saying that, I did then just wash the brush, start over with a clean white to get the most stark highlights. On the last 2 steps, where the colour was going to be the brightest, I decided to dry brush around the edge of the base so that you would start to create a natural shadow under the penguins, meaning the light is hitting around them and not underneath them. Because you don't often get light underneath you unless you're like stood on a torch or you're sat in a campfire. And if you're sat in a campfire, definitely to get out because you might die. Once I was happy with this, it was time to move on to the actual penguins themselves. For the base coat on these guys, I decided to mix a dark purple with black. Now you may be wondering why I didn't just use black. After all, they are penguins. I just don't really like black by itself. It's the same way I don't really like white by itself, and I'm not overly fond of using brown. I just think these tones could be made more interesting. I'm not knocking anybody that does. If you want to do completely black, go for it. But I just wanted to mix in a bit of extra colour to make it seem a little bit more interesting. Also, purple is one of the main colours for the wedding, like the flowers, bridesmaids' dresses, my tie and my groomsman's tie. It's all purple, so it helped tie into the actual day. When painting the penguins with this colour, I decided to add a drop of pure purple at the top of each penguin, right on the top of their head. And I would slowly kind of dab down into the darker colour as a form of wet blending. This is just going to help me create a bit of a better highlight later on. Once I was happy with the coverage of this colour, which did take around 2 coats, I came back with a lighter version of it, aka I'd mixed more purple into it, and started to feather on some highlights around the crown of the head and on some of the raised areas such as the wings and it's not quite a tail, is it? They've just got like a nubbin on their bum. You know, like the Hershey's Kiss. Yeah, they've got a Hershey's Kiss on the backside. I like that as well. The difference in the 2 colours that I've used so far are very minimal, and this just helps to suggest the shape and the form of the actual penguin rather than screaming and shouting highlights like on a Space Marine where you're edge highlighting everything. I wanted it to be a bit more naturalistic, where it's just very slight variations in tone. Once I'd got all of the feathers that are meant to be black to a place that I was happy with, I decided to move on to the white portions. And just as I did with the black areas, I decided white's a bit boring, let's mix in some purple. And I made a really, really light purple for the belly and face areas of the penguins. Now, as I was painting over black, and this is the complete opposite of that, it took quite a bit of paint. I actually ended up doing around 4 coats of this paint to get a coverage that was pretty solid. Once it was at a place that I was happy with, I decided to mix a tiny bit of white into that original paint and start that feathering motion again. This time it's going to be used to highlight the white areas, and it's going to be used on a point where the belly curves to go under to the feet, as there'll be a bit of bounce like there, and on top of the cheeks as well. I did this a couple times, and each time I added a bit more white to the mix, just to drive the highlight up a little bit more. Now I know penguins don't actually have orange beaks and feet, but in all cartoons they seem to for some reason. So that's what I'm going to paint them. And whilst I know that's not the true colours of a penguin, I think it's a lot more visually interesting to have some orange breaking up what is ultimately just purple. Now the specific paint I used on this part of the model was foolish. I used Troll Slayer Orange, and that is a very thin Citadel layer paint. The feet and beaks of these penguins required around 5 coats of this stuff, and it was very frustrating, but I'm quite happy with how it turned out because I wanted that specific colour. I like that orange. It's just a pain to apply over black. When I did actually get a coverage that I was happy with, I mixed a little bit of yellow with that paint and started to apply it to the upward facing areas, such as the top of the beak and on the tips of the individual toes. This helps to indicate the form of these areas, as a flat orange colour kind of just made their feet look like blobs. I didn't want to use a wash because that darkens the colour, which is fine, but I am all about vibrancy. So I wanted to drive the colour up rather than pulling it down. So I mixed the orange and the yellow and highlighted the area. So I mixed the orange and yellow to highlight the areas accordingly. I was a little bit unhappy with the border between the black and white feathers, so I decided to neaten that up a little bit and then try and do a bit of black lining, but using purple, so purple lining, to help separate the 2 portions. It's not the neatest thing I've ever done, but it actually works. It does help set a border between the 2 colours. The eyes I kept really simple and just painted completely black with white specular highlights in the upper right corners. The flowers were painted with a light purple, and then they were highlighted with a pure white with yellow centres for where the pollen is. The top hat was painted with a dark purple, the same colour I used for the black feathers, and then it was edge highlighted with a lighter purple. And finally, the little bow tie on the male penguin was painted with a green. Although I will be wearing a purple tie on the day, I felt green would better break up the colour scheme. Because as we know, green, purple, orange is my favourite colour combination. Hence, my orcs. As a final step for this model, I painted the base rim a light grey as to not distract from the main paint job. And also I think it's probably a good colour to start going into the cake. It'd look a bit weird if there was just a black disc on top of the cake. Now unfortunately, at the time of filming this video, I am not actually yet married. I will be at the end of the week, but that means that this has not gone on top of the cake yet. So I don't have a picture for you. However, if you do want to see a picture, please head over to my Instagram account, where there will be a picture of this in its final form atop my wedding cake on the day. The links to my social medias will be in the description below. Also, if there was any tools or anything you saw used in this video, from paintbrushes to the 3D printer, that wide a range, there will be links in the description below where you can get them on Amazon, and at no extra cost, a little bit of a kickback goes back to me. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I'm glad to be back on YouTube. I have genuinely missed it. So for all of my subscribers, I would love to hear from you in the comments. There are a few of you that I generally do talk to quite a lot, and I would love to hear from you. Thank you for liking this video. If you didn't like it, give it a thumbs down, that's fine. You can hate me. If you want to see more videos like this, then subscribe to the channel. And until next time, I'll see you later.